love how the procurement world gets up so early. If I did any other conference, they'd be still getting over the hangover from the night before. So I'm going to talk about how the speed of innovation is going to affect all of us, and really about how to understand not what technology is, but what human needs it's going to fulfill. And first of all, I want to get a sense from you in the room about how quickly you see things moving forward. So who here thinks that you will be procuring flying cars maybe in 10 years? Who thinks, just a hand, we will be able to buy flying cars in a decade? Not very many hands. So what's really interesting is they're here now. There's a startup in Slovakia making a flying car. We're in a world now where the startup mindset doesn't see the word impossible. Small teams of people, they don't have huge funding. You can go to crowdfunding websites. You don't have to have factories. You can use excess capacity in other people's factories. And this company, Aeromobile, is now making a flying car. And everywhere you look, the accelerating pace of innovation. This is robotics, a company that Google bought last year, starts out making robots for the US military. They like kicking their robot dogs. No harm was done to any robot dog, I'm assured. But the price of the parts is coming right down, and the ability to use it in all sorts of non-military uses is going up. We just did a story in Wired about this project called BrainGate. This woman is tetraplegic. She can't move her arms or legs. She has a chip implanted directly into her brain that allows her to control the robot arm so she can control the drink. Which I guess makes me an optimist about what technology can do. Just think of this gentleman in the space station recently needed a new wrench, so it was emailed to him as an attachment. He prints it out locally in the 3D printer. So everywhere you look, you know, delivery, well, that's changing as well. And I guess what unites all these fast transformations is this exponential curve. You know, the Moore's law curve of processing power doubling every 18 months or so. Well, that pattern is hitting manufacturing, it's hitting genomics, it's hitting how quickly companies become billion-dollar companies. You know, we're now, through Moore's law, which hasn't yet hit its limit, getting computers the size of a grain of rice. This one is out of the University of Michigan. You have to think about the old century, the last century, as the linear century, where you'd increase one by one. You count to 30, 1 plus 1 plus 1, you get to 30. But when you double at each step, by 30 you're at a billion. New realities very, very quickly. Take computer storage, which used to be expensive, is now effectively free. If I'd have said to you in 1994, when it was $1,000 per gig, let's set up a company to give away computer storage. Let's be really ambitious. Let's call it Dropbox, and we'll be billionaires. It would have made no sense. But you've got to reflect that wherever you are on that curve, you can't always see how dramatically different things will be ahead. And that pattern is hitting, this is the cost of sequencing human DNA, the green line falling more steeply than Moore's law. What was $100 million just over a decade ago is now a couple hundred. Think of how quickly a company now turns into a billion-dollar company. Used to take 2 decades to enter the Fortune 500 as a billion-dollar company. Now, with Waze, with WhatsApp, it's a year and a half. Think of how quickly consumers are adopting new technology. So everything is kind of rushing ahead, which means, I'm afraid, you can't sit back and relax. And I'm going to talk a bit about some of the things you can do. First, I want to give you a quick thought experiment. It's 1983, this gadget hits the market. It's got celebrity endorsers, but you are the biggest supplier of landlines in the world. You are AT&T, millions of miles of copper cable. You don't know whether to invest in the mobile telephone or ignore it. So AT&T called in the consultants. They called in McKinsey. And they said to McKinsey, tell us by the end of the 20th century how many of these mobile telephone devices you think there will be in America. And McKinsey goes and does its calculations and says, we think it could be fairly significant. We think there could be maybe 1 million in 17 years from now, which wasn't a bad guess. It was slightly out. And there's 3 things McKinsey got wrong that I think you need to consider. They forgot Moore's law. Form factor usefulness changes very quickly. The second thing is they thought about it as tech, whereas actually what defines whether something works for consumers is whether it meets human needs. And this is your emotional connection with your loved ones. This is the way you entertain yourself. It's not about gigahertz, megahertz. And thirdly, they framed their thinking in a very 1983 way. Social norms change suddenly. In 1983, if you wanted to make a phone call, you would go home, you would go to the office, you would go and find a phone box. Today, if you take a 14-year-old's mobile phone for more than 6 seconds, it's a human rights abuse. So I've got half a dozen things that are changing dramatically, which I think will affect procurement as much as any other sector. And the first is a kind of a traditional revolutionary stance in which power moves from the hierarchy to the network. And that means it's not always the CEO who decides what happens. I was in Kuwait recently. This is now where the sheep farmers of Kuwait trade their sheep. It's not a market, it's an Instagram page. Because it works. These are real phone numbers. If you want to buy your loved one a sheep, go ahead. Nobody gave them permission to do this, but when you network people, they find new ways to do useful things. So it took these guys almost a century to get 650,000 rooms, and it took these guys 3 years. Once you network people, you don't need to own inventory. We just did a story in Wired about this French company, BlaBlaCar, that connects people for ride sharing. Their ambition is to be the world's biggest ground transport company. They're growing in all sorts of territories. They don't own any cars. Anybody want to guess what all these companies have in common? Games company, travel company, cable network. Any guesses? So you can pay for all their products now with a new kind of currency called Bitcoin, which doesn't look like this because it's a virtual currency that's owned by the crowd. You know, there's no central bank. And although much of the news coverage about Bitcoin is the volatility of the prices, it's actually something that's going to be quite important because there's a backbone to the Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency movement called the blockchain, which is like the repository of trust, which records every transaction. Keep an eye out for the blockchain. That's going to be really significant. So another of the big things that's happening is we're moving from a closed world to an open one where not all the innovation, not all the value creations happens inside the sealed organization. When IBM was big in computing, there was this thing called the Homebrew Computer Club, where amateurs got together and knocked together some devices. And we're at that same stage, I think, with hardware, but with genomics, with everything. This is Google's video of the blind man in the self-driving car. This started out as a DARPA Grand Challenge. 2005 was won by a car that gets through the desert. Google acquires a lot of the team. They start researching. How quickly does something like this become a product? I was talking to the head of marketing for BMW recently. I said, how long until you think you'll be selling completely autonomous cars in Europe? He said 6 years. So from idea to impossible challenge. So there's a maker movement that's growing where anybody can go into these huge spaces. This is a company called Tech Shop, rooms the size of this with everything from sewing machines to laser cutters to 3D printers, and create new kind of businesses. And there's a maker fair movement where anybody who wants to make stuff can sell it to other people. It's a kind of community spirit. And this is a power shift away from the traditional manufacturers. Even in the motor industry, companies like Local Motors, where the crowd designs a car and you can own your car, they'll even help you make it, and they even created their own 3D printed car recently. So, you know, what we couldn't have thought about maybe 5 years ago because it just was impossible is now just another consumer startup. So you used to have access to factory space. You used to have to own a factory, I guess, in Shenzhen to make hardware. You don't anymore. You just need access to somebody who has capacity. This is my friend Emily, who makes a special bike light which projects a special green laser light ahead of you to tell the cars, the trucks, that there's a cyclist there. It's called the Blaze bike light. And she and her co-founder didn't have a ton of money, but they met a man called Liam Casey, who runs a company called PCH International that allows small startups to get access to production lines. He also makes products for Apple, for Beats.
I'd argue that the hardest part of this whole adventure is not getting yourself a prototype that you can crowdfund, but getting that prototype to a mass manufacturable consumer offering.
We wanted to create something that was stunning, really, as a product, the best bike like we could with this additional function.
For our supply chain, we've partnered with PCH, and it's been the most incredible experience. I was meeting teams of people on a daily basis that I'd never met before who were working on my product and know it better than I do.
So barriers to entry have collapsed. We did a cover story about 2 years ago about this gentleman. A couple of years before Apple, he wanted to create a smartwatch, so he goes to Kickstarter. The first one, he thought he'd need $100,000 to make. The crowd loved it. He made $10.3 million. He recently went back to Kickstarter. This is the Pebble watch. $20 million. Again, not a crowd with a factory, just a group of amateurs. Kickstarter is really interesting to see emerging consumer trends. Just in terms of, food, I took as an example. The sorts of things people are bidding for really gives you an idea of the products that, at some stage later, are going to hit mass market. So the third of the big trends is what's happened to software is happening to hardware, and hardware is becoming software, and everything is being linked together in one seamless whole. This is a product that you can download from your app store that Autodesk makes that allows you to photograph a thing, a person, and then print it out in 3D. A massive computer power that this needs made it impossible until, well, I guess just a year or so ago. And you can now design a Stradivarius, copy it, scan it and copy it, and then print it out. We had one of these played at the Wired conference a couple of years ago, and it sounded pretty good. So there is a 3D printer in the display area. I just think it's fascinating how quickly this is transforming from 3D printing, this is spinal implants, medical-grade titanium, or engine blocks, to houses, 3D-built houses, unveiled last year in China. I think where this is going to hit mainstream, though, is in food. The kitchen is where the 3D printer is going to land. There's a company called 3D Systems that launches products like this that allows you to customize the design of your cakes or your candy and then prints it out layer by layer using sugar in your kitchen. So anything you can design, you can physically make. If you want to design your own kind of pasta, there are now services that will allow you to do that. It's happening in retail and fashion. This is a company in London called Knit-An. Some RCA graduates, they've reversed engineered these traditional knitting machines, so rather than have to make 2,000 items, you can make one, and then you can customize it on the screen. If you want to co-design with somebody else or invent your own pattern, then they'll print it out. But then even 3D printing is being disrupted. It used to take up to 6 months ago, the assumption was it might take you a day or more to print something big. This is a demo that happened in March, a company called Carbon 3D. It's printing the Eiffel Tower out of this liquid goo in seconds. Again, so new processes come along and change the norms, and you've got to keep up. There's always the dark side, of course. You can't stop the 3D printing of weapons, but I guess that's for governments to cope with. So another of the big trends is the idea that there is this place called offline becomes a bit hard to conceive of when everything connects, when sensors come down in price and the physical world becomes linked with the digital world. This is Tony Fadell, used to work at Apple, led the team that made the iPod for 18 generations. Then Steve says, will you help me make this phone I'd like to do? He left Apple to do something much more exciting, to make a thermostat, because he saw the opportunity that all this hardware that had been offline, like the Nest thermostat that he made, could be online with sensors that know who's in the room, with algorithms that help work with you to save energy. And if you think about it, data coming from all sorts of physical things, from your coffee cup telling the system it needs refilling, there are no limits. And there's going to be a huge growth now in companies making online connections for what was offline. That's how much Google paid for Tony Fadell's company this time last year. So many of you are on the Internet of Things already, I guess, with these devices. Maybe your pets are on the Internet of Things. Startups are starting to see the opportunity. This is a basketball that tracks how good your shots are, sends data back to your phone so you can improve yourself. We did a project at Wired about what happens when the city is connected. The taxi gets directions based on your online schedule, or the sandwich shop knows you're coming near, knows your preferences, starts to make your avocado and chicken sandwich before you get there. Probably more important, the smartphone warns you of an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend ahead so you can cross the street. Think of a world where there are tiny sensors everywhere, powerful little computers. You don't necessarily notice when a transaction's happening. Services built on top. There is no more offline. It's going to be big. John Chambers, the outgoing boss of Cisco, talks about a $19 trillion economic opportunity in the next decade. He says the Internet of Physical Things will be 5 to 10 times as significant for business as the browser-based Internet. And everything is being connected. This is something you put in your container box. If you're shipping stuff from another country, tells you the humidity in the box, which direction it's facing. Or think of the Internet of Babies. Now there are smart devices you can give your baby. If you're a neurotic parent, you can track their temperature from anywhere in the world. Ankle chains for babies. I thought we did this for prisoners, but now you're apparently meant to do these for babies. Which leads me to what I call the Internet of Stupid Things, which is because all this technology is being democratized and it's becoming easy to apply, people are not always thinking, do we actually need it? Do we actually serve a human need? There's a company called Quirky that allows the crowd to invent things, and you can propose something, and if the crowd likes it, they'll make it. This is a Quirky product called the Milkmaid, which is a smart sensor-embedded jar that knows when your milk is going sour. And if it detects it's starting to go sour, it sends an urgent notification to your smartphone, and you have to leave work early that day or cancel your meetings and go and replenish your milk. If you're obsessed with your eggs as well, they make the $50 egg minder, the smart egg tray. Again, urgent warnings of, this egg is only going to be useful for another day or two. This is what I call the Internet of Stupid Things. Just because there are free services out there like this free translation service doesn't mean this Chinese hairdresser should have been allowed to create a banner with its English version of its name, I think. Always think of the human. So the fifth of the big trends, before I get to what we can do about it, think human becoming machine in many cases. Artificial intelligence is turning into a thing. It's becoming real. This is Demis Hassabis, who runs a company in King's Cross with about 150 smart people trying to solve artificial general intelligence. That's not just recognizing words or pictures, that's the whole lot. Trying to build intelligence, which is a big project. It's going to take him decades. He knows that. He hasn't got any products. It's hard to get revenue when you're trying to solve intelligence. But when I went to see him, he was very excited that they'd finally taught the computer how to play Space Invaders. This is DeepMind, their company. He said the first half hour, just using the data from the pixels, we told the machine, I'm not going to give you the rules, but try and get the highest score. The first half hour, it kept dying, but then it starts to see a pattern. An hour later, it knows when to hide, it knows when to shoot. He said we left it on all night. By the morning, it was the world's best ever Space Invader player. And they even had a paper published in Nature recently. As I say, no product, no revenue, but didn't stop Google buying them this time last year for £400 million. In fact, I just finally got access. I've been trying for ages and did a cover story on them for our magazine that's out next week. And
what if your devices can
Emotion, the machine is starting to recognize what you're feeling. This is a startup called Emotion.
Our industry-leading emotion-aware system will enable a revolution in device and application personalization. We're taking more pictures and videos than ever before. Imagine organizing this content by emotion, so your most memorable moments are easier to find.
So we're at a time when the machine is starting to become more intelligent. It's going to be gradual, and it's starting to understand what you're feeling rather than just what you're typing. And if you think AI is some far-flung place, if you're using SwiftKey or any of those predictive text apps, That is AI. So the final megatrend to look at is this world where you knew the rules is giving way to a world of constant change. And you need to be aware of it because it changes where economic value goes very, very quickly. Suddenly, a device like this comes out of nowhere, comes onto the market, Oculus Rift. Facebook actually bought Oculus Rift for a couple of $1 billion. If you haven't had the experience of virtual reality, it's actually quite compelling. Very quickly, interesting things happen. This is the Norwegian army. It starts issuing these headsets to its tank drivers so they can get extra layers of information, so they can see round the corner. Microsoft is creating its own version called the HoloLens using holograms.
Now we can. This is the world with holograms.
So new interfaces, does this replace
What will they enable us to do?
this? Well, probably not, but it's potentially
New
going to
ways to
supplement
visualize
it.
our work.
So augmented reality as well is adding to virtual reality. This is a company in Stockholm called 13th Lab that makes these really powerful visuals into games. The phone knows where it is. Look at that. If somebody in the office has stolen your coffee cup, you can go and shoot them in a really compellingly natural way. I'm not condoning violence, by the way. Oculus Rift just bought them as well. And then there are mysterious things. There's a company called Magic Leap. We don't know much about it, except it's had more than $500 million in funding, and it's put teaser videos online about flying elephants. So your guess is as good as mine. It could be a virtual reality flying elephant company. But the VCs are putting in huge amounts of money into this. So I guess in 2 years, every travel company will be thinking, we need to show people into the hotel room. It's going to transform entertainment and gaming. And just think of the quality of visuals, how quickly that's advancing. This is a company called EcoPixel. Imagine real-time imaging like this being the norm when you go and see the doctor. So that's all very well, David, but what does this mean for us? What do we have to do? A few tips. So again, don't be intimidated by a technology. Just think of, is this going to fulfill a human need? Is the team at work going to be expecting to use their own devices, to use their own thing? We got very excited that this was going to be the year of wearable technology. Do you remember wearable technology? That turned out not to be the case, but also this turned out not to be the case. You know, Google tried to get us to love Google Glass, but it doesn't feel very human. It doesn't enhance your identity walking down the street with these. Whereas you would walk around with clothes that are tech. So there are startups like this one called OmSignal that are putting sensors into clothes, which is quite a human thing. Sensors in this gentleman's jumper tell his heart rate, how many steps he's taken, his breathing, even it claims to know his mood. This gentleman is currently excited. If you are skiing, you'll wear a ski goggle, right? Why not a smart ski visor called the Recon that projects in front of you where you are, the temperature, the map, and so on? That's human scale wearable computing. Or you wouldn't mind wearing a little wristband. This is called the NIME. It tracks your individual heartbeat pattern and uses it to authenticate you, to get you into the car or the computer. It takes away the friction. That solves the problem. That is more likely to catch on. So another thing you need to do, I guess, is in this world where everything is emitting data, find ways to use it. These guys are obsessed with tracking every touch you make on your remote control. They've got about 78,000 different genres they've divided their programming into based on consumer demand. The human beings realize they're not as smart as the data. So they recognized a pattern. People were looking for political dramas, but they weren't producing enough, giving people enough access. So they made one, which turned out to be a pretty big smash hit. What happened online with cookies tracking people is now starting to happen offline. Companies like Shop Perception tracking consumers in physical stores to spot why they touch one part of the shelf and not another, what leads to a conversion. And if you're going for a job interview, increasingly you're going to be asked to play a game like This one, called Wasabi Waiter by a company called Knack. You have to be the waiter in the sushi restaurant. What you may not realize is it's tracking in real time how good you are at delegating. Are you good at making decisions under stress? And all that data is fed back to the recruiter as a number. Third thing I'd suggest is innovation comes from the edge very quickly. The startups are the place to look. At Facebook, they have posters on the wall with these sorts of slogans. This is how they think there. You know, get the product out there and then see what happens, even if it's not quite ready. Even questioning what kind of company Facebook is. Somebody scribbled underneath, no, it's a poster-making company. What kind of company is Google? Well, we thought it was an advertising and search company, but maybe it's also a life extension company because they're investing in all sorts of interesting businesses. Contact lenses that can help if you have diabetes, detect other medical conditions. A lot of the innovators that are moving quickly are doing really smart things, partnering with people outside the organization to get a clash of ideas. Jeffrey Immelt of GE is now partnering with that company I made a bit of fun of, Quirky, the amateur inventors, because he's realized that they've got this huge amount of IP inside GE, but maybe they're not making the most of it. So they've given away all their IP to the Quirky crowd and said, if you can come up with products that we haven't thought of, we'll partner with you. Think of McLaren. You thought of it as a car company, I guess, a Formula One company, and it does make very nice cars. But I guess what it's learned, the value it has, is in telemetry and getting real-time data, knowing how to visualize it and act on it. So it's now partnering with other people to create medical devices. It's now partnering with air traffic control to try and optimize the runways around Britain's airports by tracking everything from weather to where the planes are and creating visualizations. Expect things to keep hitting your business and changing it, and get ready to challenge your own mindset. 2007, this hits the market. The head of another big tech company that made smartphones was asked on television whether he saw this as a threat.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine. Now, it may sell.
How did that work out, Steve Ballmer of Microsoft? It's quite interesting. Even Elon Musk, who's like the definitive entrepreneur now, Tesla, SpaceX, Solar City, he's disrupting himself. We thought Tesla was a car company. It turns out, as of last week, it's now a battery company. He's now producing these batteries that they're selling to American homes to help people store energy, maybe not rely on the utilities. He's building America's biggest battery factory. So we all know what happened to these guys. At the same time, Fuji had the same challenges. They were being commodified by digital. So they worked out, actually, where do we add value? What do we have that the internet really doesn't have? We know about imaging. Let's create medical imaging businesses. We know about light. Let's create a cosmetics unit which understands light analysis. That kind of worked. So it's about reframing where your value is as things change. There's a bookshop around the corner. It's been there since 1936. Royal Coat of Arms. Who'd want to run a book business now, right? Except they've reframed their value and not selling books, but curating books. So they will now build you a custom library. They recently did a 3,000 book library for a Swiss ski chalet, charged £500,000. So that's now more than half of their business. It's about rethinking where the value is. Think of crazy new business models that this allows. This is Kim. You've probably heard of Kim. She gave away a game. She issued a free game last summer. If you so wish, you can live her lifestyle. You can pay micropayments to move more quickly. But her free game in 5 months had earned her $43 million. So we're in a crazy new world. I wrote a story last year about this man, Jan Koum, comes to America age 16 from Ukraine as a refugee, lives on welfare, frustrated at the cost of calling home, eventually creates an app. You know how this ends. Facebook buys it for a lot of money. But in the 3 years that Jan Koum spent building up WhatsApp to almost 500 million active monthly customers, how much did he spend on advertising plus marketing plus PR? You know, so if you design a product that just does the job, that's simple, that works, your crowd will be your marketing. Although when the BBC reported the sale of WhatsApp, they said it was because Mark Zuckerberg saw it as an incredibly valuable massaging service, which to me helped explain that valuation. So I'm going to leave you with my own dilemma. I edit a shiny Condé Nast magazine. Now, obviously, we do apps, and we have a website, and we've moved into conferences, and we even have one of our fellow magazines has created a college in Soho to teach fashion and design, and we've gone into the consulting business. But I have to be aware that there is a generation emerging whose expectations are very different. You know, what happens to young people who grow up expecting the screen? So the problem with the lovely shiny paper version is you can't pinch and zoom. And you can't swipe it. Which is going to cause me a problem. So I can't ignore that new reality. I guess I just have to go with it. Thank you for listening.